I think my general relationship with money has been just don't spend it if you don't have to. Well, I think there's no debating India will do fantastic over the next many decades. I think Indians are very sharp on business. There's a lot of factors that come in, into play, and people know how to navigate it.
Our guest for today's podcast is Bert Mueller. Bert is an American entrepreneur who set up his business in India. California Burrito is set up in over 40 plus locations in our country. Bert has some really interesting experiences with his journey in India as well. Let's listen in to this amazing podcast. Bert, welcome to this podcast. We are hoping to learn from your backstory and share some perspectives in this podcast. So
great to be here.
Yes.
Welcome to the podcast, Bert.
Thank you, Shubhanga.
Amazing.
And Bert came to India on a trip and found the energy interesting. So tell us a little bit about that. What was your first visit to India? How did you happen to convert and decide to build a business here when it was not your native country?
So I was in my third year of college in the U.S., and I think a lot of people that I knew were doing study abroad. So, I thought I should go study abroad too, but I thought I will take a contrarian approach to study abroad. I should go somewhere other people aren't going and probably learn something more. So decided to do India and came here in January of 2010. Wow. And I think immediately upon arriving in Delhi, I was in Delhi for probably a week, kind of had my mind kind of expanded at whatever was happening here compared to, where I'm from in the U.S. where everything's very
So which place
suburban.
In the U.S. are you from?
I'm from just outside Washington, D.C., Silver Spring, Maryland.
Yeah.
Just about 2 miles from
So
D.C.
what influenced you to consider
Choose
India?
Yeah.
I think a bunch of different things. I had done a project on Hinduism in my high school, which was a big project. It was like a video project. And I love the footage of India from that product, that video.
The project
I made.
that you did, okay.
And then also I always loved Indian food. So my mom used to cook Indian food. My uncle would always take us to Indian restaurants.
What dish was it?
Oh, back then, we're like dal,
Oh,
papad. I think more North Indian. Not that, of course, dal is everywhere, but the buffets in the U.S. are generally North Indian buffets. Not a lot of biryani. So that was there. One of my friends had also come to India and had a really exciting experience in hearing about his stories of being here and how it impacted him. So I think that put together. And also people spoke English. So I think...
made it easier.
Yeah, if you're going to go somewhere, you'd like to communicate with people and not have a 6-month learning curve of trying to figure out how to speak with people.
Correct.
So I think that was ultimately what led me to decide to come to India, and had a wonderful trip here. I was here for about 4.5, 5 months, lived with a family, had a very interesting experience at that, experiencing living with a household, like a family.
Wow.
But yeah, had a wonderful trip. And then I think kind of at the end of it, I thought,
apart
maybe
from Delhi, where else did you go?
Mostly it was in Jaipur.
Jaipur.
So the actual program was in Jaipur, but I wound up traveling across a great deal of India, not much in the south, but the north, all over the place.
And this was how long?
A good 4.5 months.
4.5 months of
probably
traveling.
May I went back. 5 months.
You went back to the US.
Yeah.
And then how did you decide to come back?
I think it was in my mind that I probably would want to come back when I didn't know. But then once I got back, I started thinking about it. And, going into my final year of school, then you have to think what happens after I graduate. And that was probably when I started thinking, maybe India is the right place to start a business. And I'd already been working in food. I had always been passionate about food. So kind of ideas started kind of percolating, and so that's what happened.
The specific idea on California Burrito, where did that come? Was it back in the US or you came down here?
I think the notion of Mexican cuisine came very much while I was here. But also in the US, my favorite QSR concept was a brand called Chipotle. Which is a great restaurant. I think the format is really good. So even if there wasn't a Chipotle, I'd be happy with a Qdoba or a Moe's, similar format. But loved that restaurant concept and felt that Indians might also like it. And then when I went back to the U.S., I kept seeing Indians all in these restaurants.
Chipotle.
I know, okay, maybe
it's true.
Something could happen here.
In fact, when I was on a short trip in the US,
Yeah.
all my friends said, just eat at Chipotle. It's the closest you'll find to Indian food. And I
Yes.
really loved it. So
Yes.
I thought you got the idea the other way around, but you formed a hypothesis and then you spotted the pattern.
Yeah, I would say that the notion of Mexican, I felt while I was here loosely. And then going back, then you say, okay, but I also like this format and maybe other people like it. And
So you meant you found the Mexican food similarities here, or
Yes.
or the people similarities?
No, the Mexican food similarities
The
here.
food
So someone in the
similar, okay.
program cooked Mexican cuisine.
Okay.
And then people loved it. So that made me, feel, okay,
Validate.
maybe, yeah, that's interesting,
Okay, from that idea to setting up probably the first restaurant, or how did that happen?
Well, I went back. I took some business school classes,
Great.
which I was not. I was a music student. I was doing public policy as well, but I kind of had to petition to get in those classes, and did a business plan. Got a job at Moe's, which is another Mexican format in the U.S. And then after graduating, kind of roped in two of my friends to come out and start the business, and then
In India.
in India.
Yeah. How did you convince them? This is interesting.
I think they just they were excited about it as well. I think kind of I was excited about it. They got excited about it, and I think at that point in time, maybe I think the U.S. was going through a bit of a recession. So then you hear all these stories, oh, we can't get a job here, and oh, they're laying off people, and
This was in the 2000 subprime.
it was like in 2010 or 2011.
yeah, subprime
So
crisis,
the thought
course.
maybe you do something very different and radical. And
Yeah, and so the notion of India, I think Steve Jobs has written about it, right? That he came here, and listening to that, Mark Zuckerberg came to India.
oh, he did.
Yeah, to sort of get more clarity in his thought and
Sure.
so on. But I think this is bizarre, right? You came here and started a business in India, not just going back with more clarity. I think that's a great story to share.
But maybe maybe it did give a lot of clarity, because I think it's a big decision to shift a country.
Yeah.
So I think
And
it's
culturally very different as well, right?
Yeah, very
So
different.
So how did you manage that? So when you
But
decided,
actually, how do you manage that? I think culture. So I have moved out of the country as well,
Yeah,
and for me as well, I think cultural differences is an exploration. You pretty much find every day that you are, the,
and
the
it's new
practices of the
learning,
land
yeah.
is very
Yes.
different. So how have you kind of looked at it?
I think fundamentally, it's always just been about going with the flow. I think that some people get frustrated by certain things. I would never. My expectations are, things are a certain way, and I'll fit into it. I won't try and change or impose, what my culture says or what suits me, because fundamentally I'm the outsider.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think there's people have different tastes and preferences for many things. I can remember when I first came to Jaipur, I had brought, in the U.S. maybe you buy some very nice chocolates.
Yeah.
And they're like a nice Swiss dark chocolate truffles or whatever. But people in India don't like dark chocolate. The average person, obviously, some
I
people
agree.
do. But average person,
I don't like it at all.
in
So it's-
Rajasthan and Jaipur, maybe they never had a dark chocolate before, and so I brought them these truffles, and then I came to the kitchen the next day. They melted them all with sugars and milk.
Oh, they mixed it
Yeah,
with
yeah, they
sugar and
mixed
milk. Oh,
everything
they made it regular chocolate.
Yeah, they made a regular chocolate. So I thought, okay, why not? That's how they like it. Why not?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so be it.
I think that's a great thought. I mean, what you said, right? That I have to accept things the way they are wherever I go and try my best to fit in. So, what did you do to fit in? That
it difficult
didn't come
to fit in?
naturally. Yeah.
I feel that India is a very fundamentally kind of accepting place. I think it's people try to get along.
Yeah.
I think more so than maybe in other places.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons, and this is something I read in a book on culture,
Yeah.
that there are so many interesting so-called smaller, what do you call them, microcosms of culture within the country
Yes.
that teaches us as Indians to adapt better.
Absolutely.
So, for example, even when we go from, let's say, the south to the north or the other way around or the west, each region has its own culture.
Yes.
And that makes us think more adaptively.
Mm-hmm.
And when we go from that zone to, and that's why people from India are all across the globe.
Yeah.
And
I
that
totally
that-
agree.
Yeah.
So
that,
same experience.
yeah. So very interesting. So any culture shocks that you had? Like, oh, like the chocolate experience, anything else?
Well, I think there's always things that are, in business that are quite different. I think a lot of things here run on relationships and maybe less on documentation.
Yeah.
And, sometimes the way things get done it might not be how it gets done with government or whatever. It's different here. Not to be in details too much, but I think ultimately you have to play with the rules of the game, where you are.
That plays in this part of the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think learning those quickly is a good idea. Yeah. Some people might struggle and keep trying to force, maybe time is less, exact timings are less cherished. As people would get very irate if you went to the U.S.
Yeah,
but here people are more flexible.
2:30 means 2:40.
Could
even 2:40 is okay of sorts, right?
Yeah, a bit more flexibility on that.
Yeah.
So I think being flexible, being patient, I think these are positive. And then you can manage with anything pretty much.
So one of the things that kind of I'm intrigued to know is trust is obviously important when you're kind of doing business or any sort of interaction. How do you go about looking at trust, right? Especially when you're hiring new people, when you're trying to kind of do business with or find new vendors.
Yeah.
What does trust mean, and how do you kind of look at it? How do you gauge trust in others? Do you have any framework?
What's your definition?
I think at the very beginning, and you hear these stories probably across the world, but at the very beginning, often there will be distrustworthy people involved, because you're so fresh. And you hear this, I think, particularly when you hear about Afghanistan and the U.S. Military being there. These people they originally start with, and then some very not so trustworthy things happen. But this happens anywhere, I think, where a foreign person comes into a culture they don't know about. So at the beginning, we had some experiences with people who were not trustworthy. And I think those, not many, but 2 or 3. And I think those experiences kind of taught us that maybe you have to, trust your gut quite a bit on things related to that, because you never really know what might be happening. But, what happened actually with the people who were not trustworthy was that other people ratted them out to us. And so I think that, that behavior was not, it reflected poorly, and people didn't like that. It was kind of, there was advantage that was being taken. So I think now, we have a fantastic team. Over time, I mean, you meet fantastic people. And
also I think when your brand gets built and people know you, then you're attracting the right kind of people as well at a later stage, or you become better judge of.
I think you become a better judge.
Yeah.
I think also there are areas of the business that are easier for somebody who is, maybe has less good intentions to take advantage. So you have to make sure those aspects are well managed.
And so I keep asking this, right? So typically you can innately be either trusting people, or you may start by saying you need to earn my trust, right? And which part of the spectrum do you think you fall into?
So I'm a trusting person, but I would say also I'm not a naive person anymore.
And how do you deal with mistrust?
It's not a matter of, it's not a, I don't, if I didn't trust somebody, I would just not work with them anymore. So
yeah, go ahead.
I would just prefer to trust people and let them do their work. And if I notice something that's not trustworthy, I would immediately part ways with them.
Yeah.
I think I can't operate in a world where I can't trust somebody. No point. I mean, you have to check what they're doing, of course.
Yeah.
That's one thing I feel that many people struggle with, right? So
yes.
They start trusting, but then there is a event of distrust or mistrust that happens. And they struggle. How do you react? Do you conciliate, or do you confront?
Yeah.
And I think that's always a challenge, an ethical challenge sometimes.
Yes.
Because you might have known that person business forever, but now here is an event that has happened because of which you don't know how to respond.
Yes.
And in such scenarios, it's what's your advice to people who are actually kind of probably in the midst
especially
of
if the stakes are high, is what Shubhanga is saying.
I think that's the thing, is that maybe I would say little things wrong, big things right. So lots of things may occur that are not very important important. But I think where there's clear deception, then I would
Yeah.
never tolerate. I wouldn't even give a second chance. That's an immediate end. So I think if there's a clear intentional deception, then
Correct.
you have to part ways there.
Yeah.
Yes.
But mistakes happen. So
Yeah.
I guess you have to be a good judge. I don't know.
So when you look back at what it's been 12 years since you started California.
Almost, yeah.
So what are some learnings you have had as an individual that you feel, hey, I'm great at this, but I struggle at this. So how would you sort of...
And how do you go about identifying that as an individual?
That's tricky. I guess over time you do get a sense of things you're bad at and things you're good at. I'm not terrible at everything. So I think I've had reasonably good instincts on people. I think, if I look at...
And do you think that's one of the key traits in building a strong business?
I do. I think that's a very important, especially in a people-driven place.
Yeah.
I think having great people, and there are fantastic people.
And what's the number of people that are there in the California Burrito ecosystem right now?
It's just over 900 people. In our corporate office, about 40 people.
And this is in how many cities?
This is over 4 cities.
40.
4 cities.
4 cities, yeah. So primarily Bangalore.
Yeah, about half of that would be Bangalore.
And Chennai, Gurgaon.
A little less, yeah. Chennai, Hyderabad, NCR, Noida,
NCR,
Gurgaon, Delhi.
yeah.
Got it.
And I heard Bert speak in Tamil recently when
Yeah?
when Chennai was launched, and it was really funny and interesting. And I think that now I get it why you tend to do that. It's to show, and that's the other thing, right? A lot of times we think that we need to do a lot to fit into a culture, but what people see is the intent that you're trying, because you can't change where you've come from, but when you put in that little effort. And it can never be perfect, right? You can't speak a native Indian language perfectly. But I think the effort you put in makes you very human and vulnerable and connected, that it matters to you.
Yeah.
And,
I think that one of the things I immediately noticed, maybe in my first 6 months in India, was that I think it goes a long way to show a little respect for whatever the local culture is.
Yeah.
And I think that, served us well to making good relationships and anyways, it's a good thing to know what people are thinking regardless. So I think, coming in, being humble, not, people have been doing things for a certain way for a long time. And maybe they're not wrong to do it that way.
And I just want to switch back to what you spoke about trust, right? So
Yeah.
in our early stage in India, I think 92 is when businesses opened up. 91.
Yeah.
So 1991,
Yeah.
when businesses sort of opened up for foreign investors to come in.
Yeah, I think we became an open economy.
Open economy
all
from where we were. And before that, it was primarily driven by family business.
Yes.
And the trust aspect that you spoke about is because now it is not a random professional I'm trusting with what I'm doing, but it had to be family members. And that's why we see, even till date, large businesses in India are family driven.
Yes.
Right?
That's an interesting viewpoint, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it is more to feel that, and the legal system is not great, that somebody runs away with my money. I can find them in the next 24 hours. So I think that's where the trust aspect and the family connected businesses are still running, and it'll take maybe a few more
Yeah, but
decades
I think taking that forward, how do you look at it?
Yeah.
Like, for example, you're adopting to an Indian ecosystem, be it the way to do business or the ecosystem, legal system, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
How have you managed to adapt? I think. Yeah. Adapt to the ways of working here.
I've been thinking about that to an extent, because I've also thought about family business, and I think you're right. Ultimately, to build a business, you need trust.
Yeah.
And getting back to kind of the original point you were making, and the higher the trust, I think the more cohesion you can get in a group. And family, obviously, trust is kind of probably implicit and taken for granted. Maybe the challenge in a family is that you can't really criticize the other person's work,
or
you can't fire anybody.
You can't fire them. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think it's changing now with the new startups. I heard a founder say this, that I'll never hire a family member and so on.
But maybe I think at least how I would see it is I think if you want to build a trusting culture, and probably but everyone can have a differentiated culture, but probably a high trust culture is better than a low trust culture for sure. And I think the way I would do that is by giving freedom to people. That might be let people manage their domains, how they see fit, and give them guidance, but not maybe have a lot of bureaucracy and give them space to work.
So based in London, I keep telling people that it's time to look east, look at India, and many leading experts talk about the next few decades being India's story, globally speaking. What are the things that an entrepreneur sitting in London or Europe or in the US actually should be learning from your experience here, and why should they be looking at India?
Why should they be looking
because
at
we telling
India?
that look, India is one aspect of it, and I'm an Indian, I've seen the economy, and me telling is one aspect, but for somebody to have come to India and to have actually seen to have an established successfully run business, how do you kind of what's your call, what's your beckoning call?
Well, I think there's no debating India will do fantastic over the next many decades. I think there's no doubt about that. I think whoever would choose to come to India should think that it's a large time commitment. It will not be I don't think India is a get-rich-quick scheme. I think it's
a 12-year plan.
It's a
or a few decades.
Probably longer.
Yeah.
It's a place that maybe takes a good amount of effort, but maybe things compound at a faster rate. So maybe it takes more effort in the beginning, and then things compound better as time goes by. I think that if I was thinking about coming, I would think about an industry where, being a foreigner, you do bring a different perspective, which I think is could be valuable in certain industries or domains where you'll be different than other people. So you can think of maybe everyone seems to be doing tech, so maybe don't do tech. You have to think of something that's maybe contrarian or differentiated. Not that you have to, but that's what I would do.
For sure.
And I actually keep telling, so one of my cousins in the UK actually has just graduated from the university.
Yeah.
Come and intern in Indian companies, right? So, I mean, in the sense, a lot of us, when we were growing up, we used to kind of think about interning in
American company.
In US company. Like we started our career in General Motors in a US company. And we learned a lot about how Western management systems are. Yeah. But if it is indeed going to be world looking at India for the next 2 decades and more, that's something that I keep telling.
Yeah, I think even I would add to that. I would say probably come and do a smaller company.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot to learn about business from. I think Indians are very sharp on business. I think that people know how trading, as we were talking about, but not just trading, but much more than that. But I think there's a lot to learn from kind of Indian entrepreneurs who are not the big ones, but the everyday people running reasonably large businesses here, because there's a lot of factors that come in, into play, and people know how to navigate it. And it's I think there's a lot to learn. Maybe there's some things to learn from a large company structure, and then there's probably different things to learn from a small company structure. And if I was coming from abroad into India, I'd want to learn what those other things that were happening.
Absolutely. I just, because you spoke about exponential growth or compounding over time, I was just very curious about how the number of stores that California Burrito has, the first store to the second to the 10th to 100 to wherever we are now.
Yeah.
What's the timeline like? So the first store took how long for you to establish? So
it took us 10 months to open our first store.
10 months.
10 months.
Okay.
So fundamentally, I think the biggest decision most restaurateurs make is their real estate, which we took time to pick the right piece.
And this was in
estate.
Bangalore.
In Bangalore.
And which?
This was in Embassy Golf Links.
Okay.
So that took time. The second one was about, I think, 8 months later.
Second one.
Yes, and then the third one was about 3 months after that. And then, we opened a few, and then took a little break, and then opened more, and then took a little break. And
so where are we now? How many?
So we were at about 37 stores right before the pandemic.
Okay.
So that was 8 years. 8 years in.
Yeah.
7 years in.
8 years for 37 stores.
Yeah, 8 years.
Great. And I think QSR or food industry at large went through a sea change during the pandemic.
No doubt.
So what was that like for you?
I think that the pandemic, made us think much more sharply about whatever we were doing. There was not a lot of room for.
Because I don't think there was zero employees in, let's say, EGL.
Correct.
Or most of
immediately overnight, half of our stores
Yeah.
were gone.
Correct.
You
So
know.
what did you do during the pandemic per se, and then what did you learn from it? And now some of those learnings still exist.
I think a couple things. I mean, one, we worked on our delivery approach. Two, we worked on our marketing. I think I read some business book that said companies that spend more money on marketing during recessions do much better coming out of the recession. Oh, we'll spend money on marketing, which we had never done before, actually.
So you decided to spend money during.
No, I mean not entirely. We had cut lots of
Yeah.
cut lots of things, but fundamentally, we said we have to think differently about whatever we're doing because whatever we've done is certainly not going to work. We did put together a program on dine-in with tacos. I think it did very well. And also, I think what we saw was that people were at home and probably they're having a lot of home-cooked food. And then one night a week, maybe they'd have Mexican or they'd have Chinese. They'd have kind of a foreign cuisine. So I think at that point in time, Mexican actually became a little bit more known, tried. I don't know. It became something people were ordering. So we'd see, the more.
So even today, is it what is more, in-store is more, or takeaways
Delivery
are
is still more.
Yeah.
So delivery has been growing at a rapid pace. Dine-in's also been growing very well, but for whatever reason, people really love the convenience of delivery.
Yeah.
So can't argue with them, I guess. Okay, they can order. I prefer dining in the store.
I think we had a time in our office.
Yeah.
Every day we had California burrito
good.
for 3-4 months. Every day we ordered it,
Yeah.
and it's really great. And I think that also talks about how you've probably understood the palate of the Indian customers better. So, any specific exercise that you did to understand what they like, what's the spice level, and how
I have to be very honest.
Yeah.
I really like Indian food, like extremely spicy Indian food. So I just have come to the conclusion that if I like it, it seems like other people like it.
That's an amazing way to say.
Okay, so
we do testing, of course, with
sure.
our
Of
employees
course.
and whatnot. But generally speaking,
but the insight came from I love it,
no,
so just sell it. So-
I can't try and guess what other people like. I know what I like, and it just so happens that I happen to like what other people here like.
Yeah.
So I think that at least bridges that gap.
So
to an
what's your favorite thing on the menu at California?
in California burrito? So I mean, generally, I'd probably have a barbecue chicken burrito. Although we have tested pork. I like pork the most, but we've not launched that in stores.
Right.
So I wish we could have pork.
And that's coming soon. Or?
I can't say, but who knows? It might sooner than later.
I need to try it. I have not tried it yet.
Okay.
So
California burrito, right? Yeah. He
Yeah.
doesn't eat non-veg, but
Okay.
yeah, he's
People
veg.
love the potato.
Yeah.
I think the potato rice.
do you
bowl
have
people
have
love.
vegan options
Sure,
as
you
well?
can
Yeah?
avoid the cheese and sour cream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. So,
So-
dinner is sorted then.
We have a store right nearby. So.
Yeah, it's very close to our office.
Amazing.
Which is great. So I just want to go back to certain things that are mid-career professionals. So at Unbox, we target a lot of high potential people in working in large companies, and how do we build their leadership and creativity at large. So we run these programs. So if somebody is working in a large corporation, organizations want people to be entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And that's one of the purposes why I got on board with Shubhanga when he wanted to do this. Because these stories of entrepreneurship really inspire people to do things.
I think, I think there's a fundamental, actually, they're not the antithesis of each other, but there's definitely the approach is very different. From what I've seen, we've hired people from larger companies, and there's a very different approach that we take, which I speaking to other entrepreneurs, it seems like everyone kind of takes compared to a large company. In a
What are those things?
I think the first one would be being very agile. I think we are maybe agile, maybe too agile, but things change quickly, and if it's not working, you junk it. Whereas I think there's a process and there's a system and there's because these are large ecosystems, you don't want to just disturb everything.
Yeah.
The cost of disturbing a large ecosystem could be very high, whereas the cost of us creating some disturbance in our ecosystem is low.
How do you look at the same systems now that you're, let's say, reaching 40 stores? Because now you must be thinking that we have to have consistency of the taste. And
you do. So I think once it works, then you port it to that.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, you need to keep some space for
experimenting.
Just keep trying things.
So just walk us through what kind of experimentation you do. Like you spoke about a new dish that's coming up. So what do you do?
I
mean, whether it's on marketing, maybe you try shifting, you just cut off 2 channels of marketing and throw it into YouTube or whatever. Do something, we've been doing this for 6 months. It worked, but maybe diminishing returns. So now let's take all that money and immediately stop it and put it over here. We just tried that with discounting. I think we stopped all of our discounts.
Okay.
Repeat, we still have some new user discounts running. But I felt that it was, I don't like discounts. They've been running too long, and other people might feel that, we need them for acquisition, but it's hard to know. You take kind of a radical decision that otherwise people might take a middle road. We'll stop it here and not there.
Yeah.
And so I think, with food, we're testing. We always keep testing new things, but we're testing using red and yellow capsicum in our fajita veg.
Okay.
So that was after I got back from Mexico. Whenever you travel abroad, you have some new ideas about the food.
Yeah.
Because you go and you see how other people are doing, and you come back and you feel, okay, that's not very good, or that's not very good. So we'll test that in a store.
Anything that you made which is Mexican by nature, but you were inspired by what happened in India, something like that?
I think some of our snacks are that way. I think like a chaat, if we think about Indian snacks, I think a lot of it involves kind of like a pakora, fried thing in a dip, or maybe some crunchy thing with lots of sauces on it.
Yeah.
Those might be kind of Indian snack formats, or something that's stuffed, like a samosa or something.
Yeah.
So I think some of the snacks you wouldn't find them on the menu in a U.S. Mexican restaurant.
Sure, yeah.
I think fundamentally the format we have is very much an American format.
Yeah.
The flavors I would like to say are Mexican flavors.
And how do you define success for these experiments?
That's often a tricky thing. Because sometimes you'll make a change that is so marginal that no one really can tell, or maybe it's like you can kind of tell, but it's very hard to tell.
Very small.
And I think probably during COVID we did a lot of the bigger ones where there was a radical. You could really see a change. But let's say we changed the red and yellow capsicum in the fajita veg. How am I really going to know? I don't know. That'll be. My gut says it's better, so it'll be better. If it runs for a year and nothing improves, and we need to cut costs, and maybe that goes back to green, because the green is much cheaper than the other ones. I feel it's better whenever we test it with our team. It's better, and maybe a consumer doesn't know immediately, but maybe over time, then you could tell. So
it's difficult to.
It's hard to know. I mean, these are I think in a startup there's just much more instinctual, or there are gut decisions. You have to take a decision,
and then probably
because stagnation is not. You can't you're not big enough to stagnate.
Yeah.
So even if you made a wrong decision, at least something kept moving and you learned something about it.
And now, kind of expanding success of experiments to success of the company and life in general. When did you realize you were successful?
Gosh, I don't. I mean, that's. Are we successful? I don't know. We've been reasonably successful, I would say. But.
And what's success for you?
You keep changing the goalposts regardless. So maybe whatever I set today as my success, or I set a year as a success. Now it's a success. Now I feel it's not that great. So maybe it should be further. But I think the thing is that at least in food, you never really satisfy all of your customers.
Yeah.
So you're always, humbled by someone is there, not happy.
So although
you never really think that, oh wow, things are some big success because there's 10 people who weren't very happy about whatever we did yesterday.
So it's very contradictory, right? You're in the food business, but you stay hungry.
Yeah, I think that's true. That's true.
What's next? And It's great. I also want to touch upon money as a concept.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult topic for me.
Mhm.
Also, it is for us to learn about it because Shubhanga comes from an investment background.
Yeah.
So when you had the aspiration of, hey, let me build a restaurant, to now I need to find money for it and also to scale it to tens of restaurants,
Yeah.
it needs more money. So what has been your journey overall?
And your relationship with money in general.
Yeah.
I think my general relationship with money has been just don't spend it if you don't have to, which has drawbacks as a strategy. But I think in India, it's probably been a good strategy. It's better not to kind of overspend. Because things can change rapidly and things don't always happen super fast. So it's safe to kind of wait and watch. I think that when we first got started, I remember making the business plan, and I would itemize all the kitchen equipments we were going to buy, and I took prices from some website. And then, of course, we come to India, and the prices are totally different than whatever we had imagined from our U.S. survey.
I hope it was less.
Quite a bit. Well, some things were much less, some things were much more.
Okay.
So, like, imported equipments are obviously much more. Local equipments, fabricated kitchen equipments are much less.
Much less.
And I remember we had gone to pitch our business to a kind of a financial person who had also just started a restaurant chain in India, in Mumbai. They had taken a franchise.
Okay.
And we very much embarrassed ourselves in front of this guy because he was literally a finance guy from some big New York bank.
Right.
And he knew all the finance stuff. I don't know if he, like the restaurant stuff, maybe he knew, I don't know about that. But he knew the finance stuff very well. And, we didn't know what a CapEx was and all these things.
And
we understood what it was afterwards.
Yeah, but we didn't. Some of these jargons that they use,
kind of
IRR.
the jargons of how we talk about
Incidentally,
finance.
today Shubhanga spoke about IRR
Yes.
in our conversation. I was like, "What is that?" I have to ask him about it later.
Yeah.
But it's these things that
It's just, I think.
But once you get the concept, you understand it. It's a live and learn. It's not. Nothing is so complicated you can't understand it.
Absolutely.
So sometimes you're so involved in the business, and I was the first time I started working and doing this, right? I had no idea about finance. So I remember meeting Shubhanga, I think 1 year after we started, and he explained what is a balance sheet and what it means. And I was like, this is too much work. These are good indicators of where we are heading.
Yes.
But it does not drive your business. It's a report card of your work.
I think it
in
really
some sense.
aids in good decision making.
Yeah.
And a great finance person, it's a great.
So how is that
different type of
from
brain.
that first pitch to today? How have you transformed?
Well, I now I understand all the concepts, but I don't think. I mean, fundamentally, I think food is about serving great food to customers and making sure they're happy and making sure it's priced appropriately.
Yeah.
I think. So I think from probably from the second or third month of running the business, we did get a good grasp on the fundamentals.
Yeah.
What are the important costs? Your food costs, your labor costs, your rent is already done.
Yeah.
You can't change that much unless you renegotiate.
Yeah.
And you have raised money from external investors, of course.
We have raised some money.
And how did, I think, talk us through, because not all businesses need to raise money from investors, right? So, and some of the things that I tell is, even though I do invest in early stage startups, many of the startups that I meet tell you probably don't need to, because you will earn money as a
From
business,
your
and reinvest, protect your equity in the company. So how has your kind of thinking been in terms of actually going and raising money from external investors versus actually just growing organically?
I think it's always been raised as little as possible. It's the same with what you're saying. Ultimately, back when we were starting, our business didn't throw off enough cash to do too many restaurants in a year.
Yeah.
And probably the second year we lost money. We opened a few restaurants and one didn't do that well at the beginning. But I think going forward, I would avoid raising capital. And,
so that you could use what your...
Yeah, I mean, now the business generates a decent amount of money to open new restaurants, and maybe our profits would allow a bank to give us a decent loan, or maybe not. But let's see. They don't like generally restaurants. So,
But actually, they do like restaurant chains.
Banks?
Yeah, they're open to restaurant
I don't
chains, but
know.
not necessarily. We can speak off the
We'll speak
record
off the
separately.
record. We don't like these unsecured loans because we don't have any security, I guess.
Secured, yeah.
Yeah. But nevertheless, I think it is important, I think, for people to recognize that going to investors and raising equity money is not the
It's
only
very
way.
expensive.
It's very
You're
expensive.
losing a lot of money.
Yeah.
So-
In
And
the
so-
yeah, I
loans.
think some people see that as kind of the sign of a success.
Correct.
Whereas
As an
I don't
ecosystem,
know.
somehow,
To me, it's a neutral.
yeah, correct. We do celebrate fundraisers rather than actually
Profits.
celebrating customer successes.
Yeah. So
as much.
what drives you every day? Where do you get that motivation to do this? Because it's not straightforward, straight cut, easy work to do.
I think one thing is that as the company changes size, the job becomes very different. So my job now versus my job 6-8 years ago is very different. But I think I love the people I work with, and I love our teams in the store. It gives me a tremendous energy to go see our people in the stores. Our customers write me on Instagram, and we see the feedback, and it's very positive. And I think that what's a lot of fun is charting the course. You have to keep on making decisions that drive things ahead. And I'm not somebody who would be much a fan of stagnating and just resting. I'm a pretty active person. So I think the thrill of every day coming in, looking at something new, trying to find a new take on whatever you've been seeing for a long time. And then sometimes you find new things, and then that leads to numbers improving, which is a validation of hopefully making lots of good decisions, and many bad ones.
Yeah.
And hopefully the bad ones are smaller.
Yeah,
and the
exactly,
good-
right.
Yeah.
How do you deal with frustrations?
Um,
I'm sure it's not non-existent.
no, but I think once you've been through, I think it's also kind of once you've seen enough things, then you modulate that.
Do you describe yourself as generally calm?
I think I'm pretty calm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not unperturbed with.
No,
Crisis.
I don't. I'm not a very, not too mercurial. I think my people should say, my team should say that rather than
We
me.
will call them for the next episode.
Great.
I think sometimes one feedback I heard from people I've worked with is foreigners are a little colder than Indians. Indians are very warm and loving, and foreigners are a little cold sometimes.
Yeah.
So maybe that is kind of a cold. I mean, I don't think it's cold, but it's a more even-handed.
More objective, maybe.
I don't know objective, but not too many, not dramatic emotional
Emotionally.
swings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what next for California Burrito?
Gosh,
Or is there more beyond California Burrito that you're already thinking?
No, I think we have a fantastic journey ahead of us. I think the journey so far has been tremendous, but India keeps compounding, and every day you keep seeing things changing here. And I think that's the same thing we have in our business, where we would never want to rest on whatever we've achieved so far. Whatever we've achieved so far is okay. It's good, but maybe it could be much, much better. And so figuring out what those things are that will make it much, much better, and experimenting till we find the right approach. So I'd say that is, I could see that going on for quite some time. But let's see. You never know.
Amazing. But we've had an amazing conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks
Same
for
here,
having me.
same here. I think it was great to have you and learn so much about how your journey has been. And I'm sure the listeners will also take in so much more from what you've shared
Yeah,
with
and I
us.
think for me, the biggest thing is you are a living example of the fact that people can actually kind of look at India,
Mhm.
look and build a business here, and be successful.
Absolutely.
And I think you're an inspiration to many in the country that I'm currently living in. So, and I'm sure to many more outside
Yeah.
India as well. So, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Thank you, Bert.
Thank you.
Thanks.